Good afternoon and good morning for those of you in the Western provinces, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. News Media Canada is pleased to bring to you highlights of brand new industry research on the power of community newspapers. Local Newspapers, Trusted and True is presented by our own Kelly Levson, Director of Marketing and Research. This session is expected to be 30 to 40 minutes in length. During the webinar, you will see plenty of facts and figures, and no doubt you will have questions. We invite you to type those questions into the questions box located on your screen, and Kelly will answer them as we go along. And now, without further delay, I'm pleased to present Kelly Levson.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you all for attending. Today, we are going to go through this new research called Local Newspapers, Trusted and True. And basically, it explores trust in advertising formats in both printed and digital, as well as usage of social media and ad blocking. Consumer behavior across several different categories was also measured to explore attitudes related to key newspaper revenue categories. The study was conducted online and includes 2,400 online interviews with English and French-speaking adults across Canada. And we specifically were interested in gathering data on Canadian attitudes regarding local newspapers, as well as other traditional and digital media. So this presentation will highlight 4 key points. Number 1, we're going to talk about newspaper reading and multi-platform. 9 out of 10 Canadians report reading newspapers on either print or digital platforms each week. So we know that Canadians are still reading newspapers, just differently. Community newspapers provide Canadians with valuable local content, so it's no surprise that local information is their main reason for reading. The next most mentioned reason is advertising, and this advertising leads readers to take action, which we will explore in more detail. In today's digital age, trust is hard to come by in media. Consumers are overwhelmed and exposed to more media than ever before. This impacts trust in various ad formats. And finally, newspaper ads are trusted most in both digital and printed formats, which provides So before we get into the specifics of the data, I like to talk about how the study was done, just so everybody understands we didn't just walk out on the street and ask 10 people what they thought and decided to release some results. We take the methodology very seriously. There were 2,401 online surveys completed. We had Totem Research manage the study. Totem has done many, many studies for us in the past, so they are fully aware of what our needs are and how to get the study done properly. So we did this survey across the country in both large and small markets, in English and in French, and the sample is representative of the entire Canadian population, and it is balanced by gender, age, and geographic region. So one other thing I'll note here is that we did 3 different distinct community sizes. So we did about a third of the interviews in populations, in markets with populations under 100,000, and then another third in markets with 100 to 400,000 population, and then the last third in markets of over 400,000 population. And that was to make sure that there was no skewing of results based on large versus small markets. So if you have any questions about the methodology, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you think of questions afterwards, you can certainly email me as well. And the last point that I want to make just on this slide is that this study was produced with the financial support of the Department of Canadian Heritage. This is, we've done a number of studies that Heritage has supported financially, and this is the most recent. So I'm just going to spend a minute talking about multi-platform newspaper readership. And this data is from our study, Newspapers 24/7. So it's important to understand that Canadians are still reading newspapers. They may not be reading in the same way they used to 10 or even 5 years ago, but they are still reading. This Newspapers 24/7 study was conducted earlier this year and measured readership on both print and digital platforms. And when I say digital platforms, I mean computers, tablets, and smartphones. So each week, regardless of platform, 9 in 10 Canadians are reading. And this proves really that newspaper readership is multi-platform. We've been doing this study now since, I think we've done 6 studies so far. The first one was released in 2012. And back then, 85% of Canadians reported reading. Now we're up to 88%. And that increase is pretty much attributed to those digital platforms. The research also finds that 1/3 of Canadians are die-hard readers of newspapers. They are reading newspapers on all 4 platforms. So they're seeing things technology to access newspaper content. Canadians now read just as much on digital platforms as they do in print. And the last thing I'll point out here is that this readership habit does vary by demographic. So millennials clearly read differently than boomers. They prefer to read on their phones, and boomers prefer to read in print. But at the end of the day, this study demonstrates that every target group can be reached effectively by newspapers.
Hi, Kelly. We have one question.
Yep, absolutely.
Does conducting the study online, say, versus CATI method create a skew of any kind?
It could be a factor, because this way we are only reaching people who are obviously connected to the internet. So the CATI methodology, which is by phone, reaches everyone, but the penetration of internet access now is so high that we are virtually reaching most people in Canada this way.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about community newspapers specifically. So local newspapers are a trusted source of information in communities across Canada, and they continue to be the preferred source for local information in both print and digital platforms. This research examines what drives Canadians to read community newspapers in both formats. The main reason for reading, regardless of platform, continues to be something that can be hard to find anywhere else, and that is local information in all its various forms. So news, editorial, sports, entertainment, events, etc. In addition, half of readers are also reading for the advertising and flyers within their newspapers. Print and digital newspaper readers respond to advertising in different ways. Print ads are more effective at driving awareness, store visits, and purchases, while digital ads drive further research online and offline, as well as referrals. So when asked to identify a single preferred source for local news and information, respondents clearly chose community newspapers in both print and digital formats. Combined, community newspapers lead with almost more than double the next 2 top choices, daily newspapers and television. And if you look at the green bar there at the top, you can see that community newspapers are overwhelmingly chosen in print. So almost 3/4, 70% of those who preferred community newspapers chose the printed version over the digital. Other digital sources of local information, like social media or local city town websites or search engines, are not as established or as credible as the combination of the print and digital community newspaper.
Kelly, we have another question that's come in.
Yep.
Does the research indicate how people access community newspaper content on their phone or tablet? That is, direct traffic on their web browser versus via search or via social media?
No, we didn't capture the referral source. We just asked if they accessed it and what their preferred choice was. That's something that we could look at doing for future research, but we don't have it currently.
Okay, thank you.
So we continue to explore the reasons for reading community newspapers, and one thing never changes. Local information in many forms continues to be the driving force for readership of community newspapers. This study asked about both print and digital formats for an expanded list of different types of local information, including local news, local editorial, local sports, entertainment, events, local crime features, as well as obituaries. And this is a question we've been asking for many years, And we continue to see time after time that local information is the #1 reason. After local information, about half are reading for the advertising, and this includes ROP ads throughout the paper, as well as flyers and inserts. Slightly more print readers choose advertising, and that's likely attributed to those flyers and inserts. And finally, we're still seeing readership of classified ads, as well as employment, careers, and real estate in community newspapers. So why do newspapers matter? This really sums it up with a front page from the Nunavut News, including this incredible award-winning photo. Newspapers really do matter to Canadians. They're sometimes the only media covering the news that matters to the people living in communities large and small across our country. News about a federal investment in air terminals for 5 communities in northern Canada or a local volleyball team won't be found in the national media. So here we're going to take a look at the detailed list of all of the various types of information that we asked about. So you can see on the left are the local information categories, and on the right are the advertising and general categories. So local news is always at the top of the list, and print is typically stronger than digital. Local sports is slightly more popular in a digital format. And when it comes to advertising, flyers and inserts are preferred in print, but not by as much as in previous studies. More and more digital flyer apps are available online, and that is likely what's driving this increase. Classified ads are slightly more popular in digital community newspapers, as are general editorial and puzzles. So Canadians admitted to reading community newspapers for the advertising, and clearly they are engaged with the ads. Once they've seen the ads, they are also likely to take some kind of action, whether that's becoming aware of a product, service, or sale, visiting a store online or in person, buying a product or service, doing more research either online or offline, or referring an ad to someone else through word of mouth. There are subtle differences, though, in how community newspaper readers respond to ads in print compared to in digital platforms. Print ads in community newspapers are clearly more effective at increasing awareness among readers, 33% higher for print versus digital, as well as generating store visits and purchases. And digital ads are effective for generating research online as well as offline. Both formats perform similarly at generating word-of-mouth referrals. So this next section explores various media that Canadians are exposed to on a regular basis, as well as the issue of trust in media. So on a daily basis, Canadians across the country are surrounded by media, bombarded by thousands of brand messages daily on an increasing number of traditional and digital platforms. But exposure alone does not equal influence or even guarantee that an ad will be seen. Key considerations to make sure an ad is noticed include trust, engagement, and frequency. Multimedia campaigns, a combination of traditional and digital, result in stronger consumer engagement in a world where advertisers must compete for the attention of consumers. Digital interactions in a single internet minute are mind-boggling. Consumers switch between screens up to 21 times an hour, according to a British study, which correlates with Microsoft's claim that the average person's attention span is now just 8 seconds. In Canada, it's estimated that Google and Facebook account for 72% of all internet spending, which is $5.5 billion. But Canadians tell us that they don't want to see ads in social media. Social media is used primarily to communicate with friends and share photos and videos. It seems the primary response to digital advertising is to use an ad blocker, contrasted to the action taken after seeing newspaper ads that we saw previously. The reason for this lies in that final piece of data I'm going to show you in a few minutes on trust in various ad formats, where newspapers, particularly in print, top the most trusted list. Studies find that the average person is exposed to hundreds of ads and up to 10,000 brand messages each day. And as marketers are presented with more and more channels to reach their customers, that number is growing rapidly. Out of those thousands of ads and there needs to be engagement. Multimedia campaigns result in stronger consumer engagement in a world where advertisers must compete for the attention of everyone. Advertising doesn't just offer the right product to the right consumer at the right time. It gets them emotionally motivated to investigate and ultimately buy the advertised product or service. That's why engagement has become so important. So bottom line, increasing engagement will help advertising break through the clutter of not only the hundreds of exposures per day, but the thousands of brand exposures as well. And if you look at the numbers on this chart, you'll see that in terms of exposure, internet is, no surprise, is number one, but newspapers are not far behind at number two, and then social media at number three. So in your everyday life, a minute might not seem like much, but when it comes to the vast scale of the internet, a minute in time goes much further than you could imagine. That's because the internet has a degree of scale that our linear human brains are unaccustomed to operating on. So this infographic shows the activity taking place on various platforms in each 60-second span, and it really helps to put an internet minute in perspective. The numbers for these services are so enormous that they can only be shown using the 60-second time scale. Any bigger and our brains can't even process the massive quantities in any useful capacity. So when we look at how much of the ad spend is online, and specifically with Google and Facebook, we see that 72% of that $5.5 billion in 2016 was taken by Facebook and Google. So digital advertising is increasing exponentially every year. Advertisers and marketers are pouring their dollars into digital advertising, and the majority is going to just two companies. So social media is the place to communicate with friends, family, and groups to share photos, videos, and shared experiences. Over the past few years, more and more people are using social media, but there are still those who cannot be reached. This study found that 1 in 5 Canadians told us they do not use social media at all. This is down slightly from last year, which was around 23–24%, but there are still those holdouts who cannot be reached on social media at all. You can see that access to news through social media up there in the blue is about a third. We found in the Reuters study that was just released that 38% of Canadians are using Facebook as a source of news. So we're pretty close in terms of numbers. But what's come up in their study, they've looked at this year over year. This and in some cases has even reversed. So the numbers are now going down. So actual access to news through social media is usually about redirection to the actual news sources itself. Normally that's newspapers. Social media sources of news require time to determine what is fact and what is fiction or fake news. Reading news on social media is more like a never-ending stream of commentary, one that does more to distort your understanding of the world rather than illuminate it. Relying on social media for the news may mean that what you read is what other people are saying about the news rather than the actual news itself, and that makes everyone susceptible to misinformation. Canadians also told us they are less interested in seeing advertising or information about products and services. And although some people read news through social media channels, that is secondary to the main purpose of interacting with friends. Only 16% of adults that we surveyed admitted that they look at the ads, posts, or videos for products and services. And here are just some examples of the kinds of ads that you'll find on social media. So why aren't more people looking at the ads in social media? Social media ads are intrusive and interrupt users' communication with friends and family. Those that are not blocking ads may tune out the ads while they're scrolling through photos and videos. And what we've also found is that it's no longer such a great place for direct-to-consumer advertisers. CPMs on Facebook have skyrocketed, and competition for limited ad inventory has grown. Currently, there are 6 million active advertisers on Facebook, resulting in a very cluttered feed. In January of this year, Facebook changed the newsfeed algorithm to prioritize user content over branded or publisher content, along with many other unpredictable algorithm changes. So social media may amplify messages, but as a primary communications medium, it lacks trust, engagement, and attention. So in this slide, we've got some really interesting information on the best choices for the optimal campaign. So 78% traditional advertising should be supplemented by 22% of digital advertising. And this came from a study that was done by the Advertising Research Foundation. They examined over 5,000 campaigns representing over $375 in spending to come up with this particular combination. So while ad dollars are still moving to digital, it is effective to keep the bulk of the dollars in traditional media. And these are other sources that are not necessarily invested in newspapers. These are our research sources.
Additional advertising in that recommendation, i.e. print, broadcast, outdoor, etc.
It includes all of those media, I believe, but there is, I can provide a link to the actual source of this information from that ARF campaign, and I'll let everybody know how to access that at the end of the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
So ad blocking. Ad blocking is growing globally every year. And in our study, we asked as well about ad blocking behavior. We found that more than half of those surveyed are blocking ads across all digital platforms. Most of the ad blocking is happening on desktops or laptops, but tablets and smartphones are also moving up the list. And interestingly enough, younger Canadians are more active ad blockers. And in the East, they are slightly less likely to block the ads. So we have 53% of Canadians using ad blockers. Globally, I think that number is a little bit lower. So Canadians tend to be more likely to block ads than other countries. So how can consumers engage with advertising if they're blocking the ads? So we find that 46% are blocking the computer ads, 23% are blocking their tablet and smartphone ads, but it's impossible to block ads in a print newspaper. So 0% ad blocking in newspapers. And then we asked about traditional ad formats and trust related to those. And this is specifically about ads, not necessarily news. This is about trust in advertising. And what we found was that newspaper ads in both print and digital instill the most trust of all traditional platforms. Almost 6 in 10 Canadians say they trust printed and digital ads in newspapers. And you can see that that green part, the trust completely is the highest of all the media. So in the recent Reuters report that I mentioned earlier, they asked about trust in news. So not ads, but in news. And in Canada, overall trust in news, regardless of the platform, is still quite high at 58%. And when you look, they also took a look at trust news that people use specifically, as well as trusting news in search, that was only 34%, and trusting news in social media is only 23%. So regardless of whether it's news or advertising, newspapers are very strong. Now here we have a lot of data, so I'll spend a few minutes on this. Printed newspapers, which is more than TV, radio, printed magazines, or billboards. Then down there at the bottom, we have the distrust in advertising in the digital formats. And you can see that even newspaper websites have the lowest levels of distrust and the highest levels of trust. Where there are really high numbers and clearly a lack of trust are in formats like social media, online banner ads, and in particular, mobile devices. People really don't want to see ads on mobile. And part of this is because the digital platforms continue to be plagued by privacy issues, fraud, as well as questionable content. And a great example of the privacy issue was Facebook recently. So even Facebook turned to printed newspapers when it needed to reach users in a trusted environment. In March of this year, Facebook took out full-page ads in major printed newspapers in the US and the UK to apologize for the Cambridge Analytica breach of trust scandal. And finally, the survey asked about ads in different media, including printed newspapers, digital newspapers, search engines, social media, and general internet websites. Specifically, we wanted to know whether Canadians read or notice the ads on the various media platforms. And the results clearly show that printed newspaper ads are read and noticed the most, followed by digital newspaper ads. So here is the data on 5 different categories. The results show that printed newspaper ads are read and noticed the most, followed by digital newspaper ads. Ads in social media and search engines lag behind, so more advertising dollars are spent on the 2 media where the ads are the least noticed and actively blocked. And again, I'll say, if ads are being blocked, then they cannot be noticed. So that is likely why we see the lower numbers for the search engines and social media. So if we look at automotive specifically, we see that 2/3 are actually reading the automotive ads in their printed newspapers, and half are reading the automotive ads in their digital newspapers, even with ad blocking. Travel is the next highest. Those ads get noticed as well in print, a little bit less in the digital newspapers, and a little bit more on the social media side. So the last thing I'm going to show you is this example from the Brandon Sun. So back in at the middle of May, there was a fire in downtown Brandon, and there are a lot of rumors being spread that the Brandon Sun paper their building had burned to the ground, which in fact was completely untrue. So somebody started this rumor and it just spread, no pun intended, like wildfire. And this is an example where we see much of the news from social media being commentary and not actual news that distorts and makes us susceptible to that whole misinformation. So there was a study that MIT conducted, and they tracked thousands of news stories spread on Twitter, which were then tweeted millions of times between 2016 and 2017. Oh, sorry, between 2006 and 2017. So a fairly long sample period. The study showed that the spread of false information on Twitter was not due to bots programmed to disseminate inaccurate stories, but instead to people retweeting inaccurate news items themselves. In fact, false news stories were 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories, and it took true stories about 6 times longer than false stories to reach 1,500 people. So this is a really good example of why newspapers need to be, or are actually, the most trusted, because they are able to accurately report on the news. There are reporters who fact check, and there are editors who review stories. They're seasoned professionals who gather the news, and it's incredibly important in our society today. So that's the end of the data part of the presentation. Local newspapers continue to provide a trusted source for local news and information to Canadians and communities across our country. Reporters, editors, and publishers tirelessly produce local content that's relevant and critical to their communities. And in many cases, community newspapers are the only source of this local information. So this is why newspapers matter. And this is why Canadians have greater levels of trust in newspapers and read the advertising within their pages. This is why local newspapers are trusted and true. So this, all of this information is going to be available on our website. If you have any questions at all, you can email me and I will direct you as best I can. So my email address is up there. And the presentation is available in both PowerPoint and PDF format. So the PowerPoint format includes a lot of notes. So that question earlier about how you can get more information on some of this and look for the original sources. And different resources is available in that PowerPoint version that you can download right from our site. There's still more information going up there. So right now there's a presentation and a fact sheet, and we'll be adding a little bit more as we go forward. And then one last thing, this webinar has been recorded, and so we are going to be making that available on our YouTube channel. So we will be posting a link to the webinar after the last one that is scheduled for tomorrow. And that way you can play it for anyone and you can access it whenever you want. And if when you're there on our YouTube channel, you would subscribe, that would help us. We're trying to get to 100 subscribers. So every new subscription would definitely help. So that's it, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. And yes, we do have a few more minutes to take some questions. So if there's any clarification that you needed of the material or thoughts about what you've seen, please type your comments or your questions into the questions box on your screen. Kelly, quick question about the data. So all of this is national data. What kinds of digging can you do into the data if someone wants to get a little more specific with the information for their market?
We can only go really to the regional level. So back on the study design slide, I talked about how the sample is nationally representative. We did interviews. We did 2,400 interviews. If we start to drill down by individual market, we don't have enough interviews. So what I can do is look at the West, which would include a combination of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Ontario, there's likely enough there as well. Quebec is a separate one as well. And then Atlantic is all combined. Fewer interviews in Atlantic than in the West, but if anybody's interested in regional data, absolutely email me and I can let you know what's possible.
Great. So are you able to do, say, for example, an urban versus rural or age groups or other demographics?
We can definitely look at data by community size, which would be those 3 population sizes that I mentioned earlier. We can also look at the breakouts by some of the larger age groups like 18 to 34, 35 to 64, or even 65 plus. So any requests for specific information like that, I can absolutely entertain.
Great. Any other questions? Just so you know, for those of you still on the line, if you're on our website at newsmediacanada.ca, under Member Services, you will see a link to Sales and Marketing Tools. From there, you will see a link to the local newspapers Trusted and True materials, and we'll be uploading more materials on that page as well. So you can either go through the main menu that's from the home page, Member Services, and then Sales and Marketing Tools, or simply type newsmediacanada.ca/add-resources. We'll send out those links to you, and we'll also make them more visible on our website for everyone to access. So if there are no further questions, we'll conclude the webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and Kelly's email address is on screen if you think of a question later on. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.